The rattlesnake's warning came too late. Rebecca Zimmerman barely had time to register the sound before her horse reared, throwing her hard against the rocky terrain of the Colorado Territory. She landed with a sickening crack, pain radiating through her leg as consciousness slipped away beneath the merciless summer sun of 1873. When Rebecca awoke, the world swam in hazy fragments. The low-beamed ceiling above her was unfamiliar, as was the rough-hewn bed beneath her aching body. Fever burned through her like wildfire, the broken leg throbbing in time with her racing heart. Outside, the setting sun painted the window with golden light, but the beauty was lost on her as darkness claimed her once more. "She's burning up something fierce," a woman's voice said from somewhere far away. "How long?" This voice was deeper, a man's voice tinged with concern. Hard to say, found her half dead out by Eagle Ridge, legs broken bad, infections set in. Rebecca tried to open her eyes to ask where she was, but her parched lips could form no words. The effort alone sent her spiraling back into the darkness. Time passed in strange waves. Sometimes Rebecca felt hands lifting her, cool cloths on her forehead, someone urging her to drink. Other times, there was only the burning heat and vivid dreams of home of Philadelphia, of her father's disappointed face when she announced her plans to take the teaching position out west. "You'll be dead within a month," he'd predicted. No place for a city girl with fancy ideas. Now, as fever racked her body, Rebecca wondered if he'd been right after all. When consciousness returned more fully, Rebecca became aware of a presence beside her bed. A man sat there, his broad-shouldered silhouette illuminated by a single candle that burned low in its holder. He was slumped forward slightly, his hat resting on his knee, revealing dark hair that curled at the nape of his neck. "Water," she managed to croak. He startled, then reached for a cup on the bedside table. "You're awake," he said, his voice deep and gentle. As he helped her drink, Rebecca caught her first clear glimpse of his face, weathered and tanned, with eyes the color of a summer storm. "Where am I?" she asked when her thirst was somewhat quenched. "My cabin. Name's Wade Lancaster. Found you out near my property line 3 days ago." Rebecca tried to sit up but fell back with a gasp as pain shot through her leg. "Best not move," Wade cautioned. "Doc Simmons set your leg but said you're not to put any weight on it for at least 6 weeks. That's if the fever breaks." He dipped a cloth in a basin of water and placed it on her forehead. "Which it hasn't yet." "The school," Rebecca murmured. "I'm supposed to start teaching next week in Pine Creek." Wade's expression shifted slightly. "Pine Creek's still 15 miles west." "And you won't be teaching anyone for a while, Miss Zimmerman, Rebecca Zimmerman." "Well, Miss Zimmerman, seems you've got a choice between getting better or dying, and neither involves teaching school anytime soon." His bluntness might have offended her under different circumstances, but fever had stripped away her usual propriety. "My father always said I was too stubborn to die conveniently." A ghost of a smile touched Wade's lips. "Good, stubbornness might just save your life." He stood, stretching his tall frame. "I'll fetch some broth. You need to keep your strength up." When he returned with a steaming bowl, Rebecca noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "Have you been watching over me all this time?" Wade shrugged as he helped her sip the broth. "Someone had to." Mrs. Sullivan from the neighboring homestead helped during the days, but she's got 5 young ones of her own to tend to. "And at night," I managed. His tone suggested the subject was closed. Over the next hours, Rebecca drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time she woke, Wade was there, sometimes dozing in the chair, sometimes reading by candlelight, but always present. The candle beside her bed burned steadily lower, marking the passage of time. During one moment of clarity, Rebecca asked, "Don't you have ranch work to do, cattle to tend?" Wade looked up from the book in his hands. "Horses, not cattle, and my foreman's handling things." "You're the boss, then, of the Broken Arrow Ranch, yes." There was no pride in his voice, just simple fact. "Why are you doing this?" Rebecca asked, genuinely puzzled. "You don't know me." Wade was silent for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. Finally, he closed his book. 5 years ago, my wife Martha caught scarlet fever. I was away delivering horses to Fort Collins. By the time I got back, his voice roughened. She died alone. No one should have to face death that way. The simple tragedy of his words silenced Rebecca. She wanted to offer comfort, but the fever pulled her back under before she could form the words. That night, her fever spiked dangerously high. Rebecca thrashed against the bedcovers, crying out as fire seemed to consume her from within. Through the haze, she felt strong hands holding her down, heard Wade's voice urging her to fight. "Stay with me, Rebecca," he commanded. "Don't you give up." "It hurts," she whimpered. "I know it does." "But you're stronger than this." When she began to shiver violently, Wade hesitated only briefly before climbing onto the bed and gathering her into his arms, lending her his warmth. "You're going to be fine," he murmured against her hair. "Just hold on till morning." Rebecca clung to his voice like a lifeline in a stormy sea. Throughout the long night, he spoke to her, sometimes telling stories of his ranch, sometimes reading from his book, sometimes just murmuring reassurances. The candle burned lower, its flame flickering weakly, but Wade never left her side. As dawn broke, painting the small cabin with pale light, Rebecca's fever finally broke. She awoke to find herself curled against Wade's chest, his arms still protectively around her. For a moment she remained still, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "Wade," she whispered. His eyes opened immediately, alert despite his obvious exhaustion. When he realized she was lucid, relief washed over his features. "Your fever's broken," he said, pressing a hand to her forehead to confirm. The impropriety of their position suddenly struck Rebecca, and a blush rose to her cheeks. Wade, noticing her discomfort, carefully extracted himself from the bed. "I apologize for the unconventional treatment," he said stiffly. "Your fever was dangerous, and I feared you saved my life," Rebecca interrupted. "Thank you." Over the following days, Rebecca's strength gradually returned. Though still confined to bed with her broken leg, she found herself increasingly alert and restless. Wade brought her books from his small collection, and they passed many hours in conversation. She learned that he had come west from Boston 15 years earlier, seeking adventure and finding instead a harsh but rewarding life raising horses. His Broken Arrow Ranch had a reputation for breeding some of the finest horses in the territory. "And you?" he asked one afternoon as he changed the bandage on her leg with surprisingly gentle hands. "What brings a city woman to teach in a frontier town?" Rebecca watched him work, noting how the sunlight caught the silver strands beginning to appear at his temples. Though she guessed him to be in his mid-30s, only about 10 years her senior, there was a weathered quality to him that spoke of a life lived hard. "My father owns a textile mill in Philadelphia," she explained. "He expected me to make an advantageous marriage and settle into society life. But I wanted something meaningful. And teaching children in the wilderness seemed meaningful. It still does," she said defensively. "These children deserve education as much as any in the city, more perhaps since their opportunities are fewer." Wade's expression softened. "I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. It's admirable what you're attempting. Foolhardy perhaps, but admirable." As days turned to weeks, Rebecca began to see beyond Wade's gruff exterior. She noticed how he always positioned her chair by the window in the afternoons so she could enjoy the view of the mountains. How he brought wildflowers to brighten the cabin. How his rare smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and grief. One evening, as they shared a simple meal of venison stew, Rebecca asked, "Will you tell me about Martha?" Wade's hand stilled, spoon halfway to his mouth. For a moment, she thought she'd overstepped, but then he set the spoon down carefully. "She was from Boston, like me. Her father was my father's business partner." A faint smile touched his lips. "She was supposed to marry someone else, someone suitable, but we'd loved each other since childhood. When I decided to come west, she insisted on coming with me. She must have been very brave." She was. Pride and sorrow mingled in his voice. "This land broke many women, but not Martha. She built this cabin with me, planted that garden you can see from the window. She even learned to break horses." His voice roughened. "I keep thinking I should have been here when she fell ill. That I could have saved her somehow." Rebecca reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "You couldn't have known." Wade turned his hand, briefly squeezing her fingers before withdrawing. "Perhaps not, but I've made sure to be prepared since then. That's why I had medicines on hand when you needed them." As her recovery progressed, Rebecca became restless, confined to the cabin. Noticing her frustration, Wade fashioned a crude crutch and began helping her outside for short periods each day. They would sit on the porch in the cool of the evening, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "It's beautiful here," Rebecca remarked one evening, "different from what I expected." "What did you expect? More lawlessness, I suppose." "That's what the novels back east portray," Wade chuckled, the sound warming her more than the shawl around her shoulders. "There's plenty of that too, just not on my property. Town's a different matter. Pine Creek's growing fast since the silver strike last year." "Is that why they need a teacher so urgently?" "Partly. Families are settling, looking to put down roots. Children need schooling." He paused. "Though I'm not sure you realize what you're getting into, some of those children have never seen the inside of a schoolhouse. And their parents aren't all convinced book learning has value. All the more reason they need me," Rebecca said firmly. Wade studied her for a long moment. "You really aren't planning to give up, are you? Did you think I would?" Most city women would have taken the first stage back east after this experience. Rebecca smiled. "Perhaps I'm not most women." Something shifted in Wade's gaze. "No," he said quietly, "you most certainly are not." 4 weeks after her accident, Doc Simmons returned to check on Rebecca's progress. He was a grizzled man with kind eyes who examined her leg with professional detachment. "Healing well," he pronounced. "Another 2 weeks before you can put weight on it, but the bone's knitting properly." "So I can travel to Pine Creek soon?" Rebecca asked eagerly. Doc Simmons frowned. "Travel, yes. Start teaching. That's another matter. You'll need more time to regain your strength." Rebecca's face fell. "But the school term can wait," Wade interrupted firmly. "The town council's already found a temporary replacement. The Reverend's wife is handling classes until you're fully recovered." After the doctor left, Rebecca turned to Wade with suspicion. "You arranged that, didn't you?" Wade busied himself stoking the fire. "I sent word to town about your condition, that's all. The council made their own decisions. But you suggested they find a replacement. I suggested they not expect you to teach while you're still healing." He straightened, meeting her gaze. "Is that so wrong?" "No, but—" Rebecca hesitated. "I don't like feeling beholden. I've imposed on your hospitality for too long already." "You haven't imposed. I invited you to stay." "After finding me half dead on your property," she pointed out. "That's hardly a proper invitation." Wade's expression softened. "Would it help if I invited you properly now? Rebecca Zimmerman, would you do me the honor of remaining as my guest until you're fully recovered?" Despite herself, Rebecca smiled. "When you put it that way, how can I refuse?" As her strength returned, Rebecca began helping around the cabin first with small tasks like shelling peas or mending clothes, then gradually taking over more of the cooking. Wade protested at first, insisting she needed to rest, but eventually conceded that the activity was good for her recovery. She discovered she enjoyed the domestic routine more than she'd expected. There was satisfaction in creating a hearty stew that brought appreciation to Wade's eyes, or in seeing the cabin tidy and welcoming when he returned from a day's work with the horses. One afternoon, Rebecca hobbled outside with her crutch to find Wade working with a magnificent black stallion in the corral. She watched, mesmerized, as man and horse moved in a graceful dance of wills. Wade's commands were quiet but firm, his movements confident without being domineering. When he finally noticed her watching, he secured the horse and came to join her by the fence. "He's beautiful," Rebecca said, nodding toward the stallion. "Midnight. Best stud I've bred. His offspring fetch top prices from here to California. You have a way with them, the horses, I mean." Wade leaned against the fence beside her. "They're honest creatures. No pretense or deception. Treat them fairly, they'll do the same." "Unlike people?" Rebecca asked, detecting something beneath his words. Wade was silent for a moment. "I've found most people eventually show their true nature. Good or bad, it comes out in time." "And what's my true nature, do you think?" The question slipped out before Rebecca could consider its impropriety. Wade turned to face her, his gaze traveling slowly over her features as if memorizing them. "Determined, brave, perhaps a bit reckless." His voice softened. "Beautiful inside and out." The compliment brought warmth to Rebecca's cheeks. "I'm none of those things." You survived a broken leg and fever that would have killed most. You're still determined to teach in a frontier town despite nearly dying before you even arrived. If that's not bravery and determination, I don't know what is. Before Rebecca could respond, Wade's foreman rode up with news of a fence breach on the north pasture. Wade excused himself, but the intensity of his gaze lingered with Rebecca long after he'd gone. That evening, Rebecca sat on the porch watching the sunset and contemplating her situation. In less than 2 weeks, she would be well enough to travel to Pine Creek and begin the teaching position she'd journeyed so far to fill. Yet the prospect no longer filled her with the same anticipation it once had. She heard Wade's footsteps before she saw him, recognizing his steady gait. He joined her on the porch bench, offering a cup of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts," he said after they'd sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. "I was thinking about Pine Creek," Rebecca admitted. "About teaching. Having second thoughts. No, not exactly." She sipped her coffee, organizing her thoughts. "I still want to teach. I believe in education, in its power to change lives, but I'm realizing there are other things I want too." Wade's gaze was steady on her profile. "Such as?" Rebecca gestured to the land spread before them, the mountains purpling in the distance, the meadows where horses grazed, the small garden Martha had planted and Rebecca had recently tended. "A home. A place that matters, people who matter. Pine Creek could become that," Wade said carefully. "It could." Rebecca turned to face him, "or it could already be here." The air between them seemed to still. Wade set his coffee cup aside and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. Rebecca, a rider approaching at speed, interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. Wade was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Wade," the rider called as he drew closer. "There's trouble in town. Holcomb's gang rode in an hour ago. They're threatening to burn the school unless the marshal releases Holcomb's brother." Wade cursed under his breath. "Get inside," he told Rebecca. "Lock the door." "Wait," she caught his arm. "You can't go alone. If it's a gang, the marshal will have assembled men by now. I need to join them." His expression softened briefly. "I'll come back. We'll finish this conversation." Before she could protest further, he swung onto his horse and rode away with the messenger, leaving Rebecca staring after him with a knot of fear in her stomach. True to his word, Wade returned late that night. Rebecca had refused to sleep, keeping vigil by the window until she saw his silhouette approaching in the moonlight. She flung open the door, relief washing over her at the sight of him whole and unharmed. "What happened?" she asked as he removed his hat and gun belt. "Holcomb's gang thought they could use the school as leverage. They didn't count on half the town being ready for them." There was grim satisfaction in his voice. "No one was hurt, except 2 of Holcomb's men who will be nursing bullet wounds in jail alongside their boss. And the school, safe. Though it's hardly more than a shack with benches." Wade's eyes softened as they met hers. "It'll need a dedicated teacher to make it a proper school." Rebecca stepped closer to him, emboldened by the relief of seeing him safe. "And will this teacher have support in town?" "She'll have at least one rancher firmly in her corner." Wade's voice dropped lower. "If she wants him there. And if she wants more than just support." Rebecca's heart hammered in her chest at her own boldness. Wade closed the distance between them, his hands coming to rest lightly on her waist. "Then she need only say so." Rebecca reached up, her fingers brushing the line of his jaw. "I've never been good at asking for what I want." "Try," Wade whispered. "I want to stay, not just until I'm healed. I want to teach in Pine Creek, but I want." She took a deep breath. "I want to come home to you." Wade's eyes darkened. "You should know what you're asking for. I'm not an easy man. This isn't an easy life." "I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for real." The kiss, when it came, was gentle at first, a question, an offering. But as Rebecca responded, it deepened into something that spoke of loneliness ended and possibilities beginning. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to feel this way again," he admitted. "After Martha, I thought that part of me was gone. And now I find myself thinking of a future I'd given up on, a home that's truly lived in again. Children, perhaps." Rebecca smiled, her heart full. "I'd like that." The following weeks passed in a blur of recovery and planning. True to Doc Simmons' prediction, Rebecca was able to put weight on her leg after 6 weeks, though she still walked with a slight limp that he assured her would fade with time. Wade escorted her to Pine Creek to meet the town council and see the schoolhouse. The building was indeed modest, but Rebecca saw its potential immediately. The council members, impressed by her dedication in coming west despite her ordeal, welcomed her enthusiastically. "School term starts in 3 weeks," Mayor Hendricks informed her. "We've got 28 children enrolled, ages 6 to 16. "I'll be ready," Rebecca promised. As they rode back to the ranch, Wade was unusually quiet. Finally, he cleared his throat. "There's a matter we should discuss before you begin teaching." "What's that?" "Propriety. A school teacher is expected to maintain certain standards of behavior. Living at my ranch unchaperoned would raise eyebrows." Rebecca hadn't considered this aspect. "I suppose I could find lodging in town, or," Wade said carefully, "there's another solution." When he explained his thinking, Rebecca's eyes widened. "That's quite a practical proposal." Wade reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully. "If it seems merely practical, then I've expressed myself poorly." He reached across to take her hand. "Rebecca Zimmerman, I'm asking you to marry me because I've fallen in love with you, because the thought of you living in town while I'm at the ranch is unbearable, because I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes. When what? "When did you fall in love with me?" Wade's expression softened. "I think it started that night your fever broke. You opened your eyes and there was such strength in them. But I knew for certain the day you insisted on helping with the wash despite your leg and ended up soaking us both when you lost your balance." His smile was tender. "You laughed, then really laughed, and I realized I wanted to hear that sound for the rest of my life." Rebecca leaned across the space between their horses, heedless of the precarious position, and kissed him. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in Pine Creek's small church. The ceremony was simple but well attended. It seemed the entire town was curious about the new schoolteacher and her whirlwind romance with the usually solitary rancher. Mrs. Sullivan, who had helped nurse Rebecca during her illness, arranged wildflowers for the church. The mayor's wife provided a cake, and the saloon owner, surprisingly, donated his finest whiskey for toasts. Rebecca wore a blue dress that Wade had ordered from Denver, arriving just in time for the ceremony. As she walked down the aisle toward him, she saw in his eyes everything she'd ever hoped to find: respect, admiration, passion, and love. That night, as they returned to what was now their home, Rebecca paused on the porch, looking out at the land stretching before them, having second thoughts. Wade asked, noticing her hesitation. Rebecca shook her head. "Just the opposite. I'm thinking how close I came to missing this if that snake hadn't spooked my horse. If I hadn't found you," Wade continued, "if my fever hadn't broken." Wade drew her into his arms, but it did. And here we are. Later that night, as they lay entwined in what was now their bed, a single candle burning low beside them, Rebecca traced the lines of her husband's face in the golden light. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "That sometimes the journey you plan isn't the journey you're meant to take," she smiled. "I came west to teach, never imagining I'd find a home, a husband. And I thought I'd live out my days alone, never dreaming a half-dead schoolteacher would steal my heart." Wade's arms tightened around her. "I'll never forget finding you that day or watching over you through those fevered nights. I was so afraid you wouldn't survive. But I did," Rebecca said softly. "Thanks to you." "Thanks to your own strength," Wade corrected. "I just sat with you until the fever broke." Sometimes that's all anyone needs, someone who won't leave when the night is darkest. The candle beside the bed guttered and went out, but neither moved to light another. In the darkness, they found each other, sealing with touch and whispered promises the bond that had begun in those desperate hours of fever and healing. 6 months later, as winter settled over the Colorado Territory, Rebecca stood before her students in the Pine Creek schoolhouse. They were a diverse group, children of miners, farmers, merchants, and ranchers, but they shared a hunger for knowledge that made teaching them a joy. "Mrs. Lancaster," called Tommy Jenkins, the blacksmith's son, "when's the baby coming?" Rebecca placed a hand on her slightly rounded belly, smiling. "Not until spring, Tommy, And that's not relevant to our geography lesson. The class giggled but settled back to their maps. As Rebecca circulated among the desks, helping students locate rivers and mountain ranges, she reflected on how completely her life had transformed in less than a year. Each day, she rode to town to teach, returning home in the afternoon to the ranch that was flourishing under her and Wade's combined efforts. The garden had been expanded, the cabin improved with new furniture and curtains. Wade's horse breeding business continued to thrive, with Rebecca keeping the accounts with a precision that had increased their profits substantially. And now, with a child on the way, their joy seemed complete. That evening, as they sat before the fire in their cozy cabin, Wade placed his hand over hers on her growing belly. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer. Rebecca leaned into his embrace, thinking of the long journey that had brought her here, not just the physical distance from Philadelphia to Colorado, but the emotional journey from independence to partnership, from ambition to love. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "Though I still intend to continue teaching after the baby comes," Wade laughed, the sound rich and warm in the firelit room. "I'd expect nothing less from the woman who survived a broken leg and fever just to get to her classroom." "The classroom could have waited," Rebecca said softly. "You were what I really needed to find." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the land in pristine white. But inside the cabin that had once known grief and loneliness, there was only warmth and the promise of tomorrow. The candle on the table burned steadily, a beacon of the home they had created together, a home born from a fever broken and a love discovered in the wild heart of the West.